Wealthy businessman Zaza Korda appoints his only daughter, a nun, as sole heir to his estate. As Korda embarks on a new enterprise, they soon become the target of scheming tycoons, foreign terrorists, and determined assassins. The Phoenician Scheme is directed by Wes Anderson and stars Benicio del Toro, Mia Threapleton, Mike Cera, and only as Wes Anderson could do, many, 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 many more. So, Jeffrey, what did you think about the Phoenician Scheme?
I have a really odd relationship with Wes Anderson movies. Like, I've always really loved the Royal Tenenbaums and Rushmore. I actually showed you the Royal Tenenbaums on Christmas one year. I've always really loved those first couple films. And from there, it gets really varied for me. In the past, I've actually been kind of an avowed hater of his films. I think that, like, looking back on it, that was really misguided. That was around a time where I was in college and there was a lot of very smart people around me with very, like, insightful and well-meaning opinions, that I had this misconception that if you had a really strong opinion, you would appear more intelligent. And of course, being a college student and being somewhat emotionally immature, appearing intelligent was a very important thing to me. So I think that I held on to that opinion and put Wes Anderson in the back corner and didn't engage with his work for a long time because I had dismissed it. Around the time when you showed me Asteroid City last year, I realized that either I had changed or Wes Anderson had changed, and more likely I had changed. I imagine that there's some nuances and there's some stuff that's a little different about Wes Anderson's films as you go through his filmography. But at the same time, I'm much more receptive to his style nowadays than I used to. And contrary to, past Geoff's opinion, I don't think really severe opinions are that intelligent. I actually think the nuanced opinions where you're in the middle and you're like quietly evaluating the entire thing is the more intelligent opinion. And that's what I found with Wes Anderson. So I'm actually really interested to revisit his past work and see if maybe I like Grand Budapest Hotel now. Maybe I like these films. I'm not really sure. So anyway, when I really enjoyed Asteroid City a few years ago and thinking it was his best film in almost a decade, I would say that Phoenician Scheme is a much more minor work in my opinion, but it's mostly delightful. Like, I know that people say that about Wes Anderson's work, that it's not going to make any new converts to his style, and I think that's probably true here. But I've never taken issue with how ornately he takes his sets, like how ornately designed his sets are, and the overall craft of his technical filmmaking, because I think it's on par with very few other people, even though sometimes I find the emotional beats lacking in his films. And that's true here as well. I would say that the humor and the style compensate so much for maybe something that's missing in these films. That's true here as well, but the humor and the style is dialed up to 11 that it's really easy to notice that a couple of things may not work. It's mostly a delight.
Yeah, I completely agree. On the conversation of Wes Anderson himself, he really is an extremely unique director. Anybody who has seen a Wes Anderson film is aware of like his proclivity for certain, technical aspects, such as his pastel color grading, the side-to-side dolly shots, the hyper-individualistic characters, and the set designs, as you were referring to, that are so rich in textures and objects. So it's no surprise that the Phoenician Scheme really follows in that same blueprint. While I've seen many remark, and this ties a little bit to what you had been saying, some people will say it's a box he's trapped himself in. I see that as really more a place he's created for himself, like his own personal playground, a place that he can like let his imagination run wild. And so while I think the mechanics might be the same in this film as they are with a lot of his other films, there's really no replicating what he does. His films are so unique, and for better or worse, his films are one of a kind. Going from that, I think he's at his best when his characters take the front seat and all these unique stylistic flourishes really support their personalities and go along with the themes of the film he's creating. As you were talking about, last year's Asteroid City was really a great example of the collision of such rich detail with these equally rich and humorous characters. So when it comes to the Phoenician Scheme, well, I don't think it always hits that same mark as it did for me in Asteroid City. I did overall enjoy the film. I think it's a movie that really focuses on building out these characters and its themes to maybe a more quaint and endearing conclusion, which is something that I don't think has been the case in his previous films as of recent. For example, for all the supporting characters that this film has, it feels a little bit more personal because it really focuses on these three main characters, and the others really just show up from time to time in different sequences. And that's something I will come back to a little bit later in this review because I want to get a little bit more deeper into that and what I liked and didn't like about that decision. Let's skip to the narrative of this film. We have Zaza Korda. He's an industrialist and an arms dealer who is the constant target of these assassination attempts.
So much of the humor in Wes Anderson is the concept of something that when you think about it, it's really funny. Kind of similar to like Curb Your Enthusiasm in a way. Like just the idea that he's been in 9 plane crashes and he had like 12 wives and all these things. So like you're starting to describe the plot and I'm reminded of how funny it is because of how ridiculous it is. But.
Yeah, we get this great opening sequence where he's on a plane and all of a sudden a bomb goes off. There's a hole in the plane and he has to crash land this plane. But in Anderson's, signature way with this long dolly shot after the plane crash, we get all these interesting details. For example, on the ground, we see these books about bugs. We see a case of hand grenades and so much more. All these things are starting to inform us what this character is like, but also act as little Easter eggs because all these little objects are going to be referenced throughout the film.
And that's actually so in the opening credit sequence too. Like we learned so much about him through the opening credit sequence. Like he's in the bath, he's having a cigar, somebody is bringing him like a really nice chilled bottle of wine, and he has all of these servants doing all of these very specific things. So there's a way in which he's building up characters in this film. I'll talk about this a little more later, but almost like a fusion of his style and a lot of the flourishes with set design that is colliding with his character development.
Yeah. I completely agree. I'm glad you mentioned that opening credit. It's like an opening credit shot.
Yeah.
And it's playing as like an overhead to this bathroom. So we see the floor of the bathroom from a shot above.
I heard an interview with him after like I wrote my notes and everything, but it's a piece by Stravinsky and it's actually about ballet.
Oh.
So the familiar beats of the ballet, it gave him the ability to coordinate that scene in a certain way that feels like a ballet in a way. So I'm really anxious to see it again and with that in mind.
Yeah, no, I thought it was absolutely an amazing opening credit sequence because it's doing the dual purpose of like showing everybody that's involved in the film, as I love seeing earlier in a movie nowadays, but also showing all these little details, as you were saying, like that wine bottle that you were talking about. All these nurses are filtering in and out of the room with their own personal goal in mind. They're all doing something. One was that wine bottle. They pour him a glass of wine, which is funny because one of the other ones brought him food, which was eggs. So you get the impression it's breakfast time.
Yeah.
And he's also having a glass of wine poured. And then she goes and she puts it in the bidet. And it's at that point you realize that the bidet is filled with ice.
Oh, I actually didn't realize that. There's so much going.
Yes, there's so much going on.
I hope he's not using that bidet.
And all those little details and how they inform our characters really extend to our next two characters. After surviving this latest assassination attempt in order to protect his wealth, he enlists his daughter Liesel, who he hasn't spoken to in years, to take control of his estate should anything happen. And also while in this meeting, we meet the new tutor, which is Bjorn, played by Michael Cera, and he ends up kind of being roped up into this whole thing as an administrative assistant. But it's these three characters that I was talking about that the film really decides to focus on quite strictly through the entirety of its runtime.
Gosh, these characters are so good. So I found out that this role was written for Benicio del Toro, and you can almost kind of tell because he's fantastic in it. It's almost like a satirical underlay of what he was doing in Sicario. It's great. Like he's this terrible guy. He's almost like if There Will Be Blood was a comedy. I thought he was just terrific. I know that there's been a lot talked about why Michael Cera hasn't worked with Wes Anderson yet because a lot of his acting is so much in Anderson's register, and it really lived up to my expectations. I thought he was fantastic as well. This is not his fault, but I couldn't get over some of his accent sounding like Mrs. Doubtfire.
Mrs. Doubtfire?
Yeah, there was like, like that kind of thing.
When you said it like that.
I had like I thought he was great, and the way that Wes Anderson likes to play with caricature, I thought that Michael Cera was perfect. We won't talk about it now, but there's like a
change of sorts.
There's a change of sorts with his character, and he's equally great at that change.
Yes.
So I thought he was just fantastic. Benicio del Toro is like my favorite actor here. I think that he is just absolutely made for this role.
I completely agree. He plays this role so deadpan and direct that it's almost easy to miss the subtle changes in his character, like the evolution that's happening. Yeah. And Threapleton, who plays the daughter Lisa in the film, she is quite like her dad in that same way with this directness and this deadpan humor, this disposition that she has. But since her character is on the verge of becoming a nun, she's constantly interjecting these moral conundrums as she's surrounded by the immorality of her father. Mm-hmm. As you were talking about, we have Michael Cera, and yes, I absolutely loved his character. He plays this Norwegian entomologist who is extremely different than the two of them. He has this warm and endearing nature about him that when he's connecting with the other two characters, he comes across like so much more personable, where the other two come across as a bit cold. I think that's more of a product of like the ruthless world built by their own design, and that's something we'll talk about a little bit down the line. But
there's a scene pretty early on where he gets kind of drunk on 3 beers, and like how cute he is as a human being actually starts to come out.
That's another little detail. Going to the details where we're talking about that overhead shot in the bathroom, this was another great one, because there's a conversation between him and Liesel that's happening on the train during the sequence. It's being cut away from. We see another beer added to the table.
Yeah, and what's really funny is it's apparently her first time having alcohol, and she seems completely fine, and he seems wasted off of 3 beers. 3 little beers, 3 little European beers.
Yeah, she was doing something with that wine at the convent, I guess.
That's pretty funny.
So on that note, talking about the train sequence, I want to dive a little bit into the supporting cast here. So the best way I could describe this is the film is built into chapters, as Wes Anderson often does.
Yeah, and this film in particular actually helps me keep track of things because it doesn't show you things. At the end of the Bryan Cranston sequence with Tom Hanks, we don't see the end of how this turns out. So we find out from the chapter sequence how it turned out.
So on the topic of the supporting cast, and you were talking about that scene with Tom Hanks, this film employs like the self-referential method of its narrative. There are these boxes that are laid out in the beginning of the film, and they each are basically these chapters, as we're going to find out, because there are these groups of people that he has to meet to make up this gap in financing for all of these projects that he wants to complete. So it's in each of these chapters that we get to meet these different supporting cast members. I think this is a choice that resulted in both positive and negatives for the film, in my opinion. The positives being that these supporting characters were really given their own individual moment to shine. We have this great sequence, as you're saying, with Tom Hanks, Bryan Cranston, and Riz Ahmed, where they're playing a game of basketball. That scene is just so witty and fun that you could tell that these actors are just having so much fun doing this sequence. Going from there, each supporting cast member just got less and less time.
It's true.
It's unfortunate because as we're progressing, the importance of the characters to the story grow.
Yeah, I hadn't realized that. But yeah, that's definitely true.
So this really specifically for me came to Benedict Cumberbatch's character, who ends up having so much importance in the film, but for the first 3/4 of runtime, he's kind of relegated to mere acknowledgements of his character. Had we been introduced, I think, in some ways to him sooner, maybe in like cutaways to like his character, there's this great moment where I think Benicio del Toro's character is referring to all these people. And I think Wes Anderson, in true Wes Anderson fashion, could have cut away to them and showed us little clippets of them. I think that would have done a little bit more to, I don't know, give us an impression of these people, how they move in a space, all these character traits that he can build into a scene in so little time and in such a little, frame. I think he could have achieved that with showing us some of these people a little bit earlier. I think because of that, the film does at times feel a little fragmented, and I think it would have felt a bit more cohesive, kind of like in Asteroid City. All the supporting cast members, they're layered on top of each other, and we get to see them throughout the film. They kind of end up being like this humorous joke as they play throughout the film. And in this movie, I just felt it was a little bit more fragmented.
So I want to talk about something that I've always struggled with Wes Anderson movies, and I feel like I've grown a lot with it, but it's his use of artifice. So he has a particular style where he portrays characters as two-dimensional caricatures many of the time, and we've been talking a lot about he has this very deliberately deadpan style, and if you're not on its wavelength, I think it can often feel uninvolving or like disengaging in certain ways. I think there's a turn in his work where the artifice is...
Sorry. You should see that in slow motion. I was just looking at it like, don't.
I think there's a turn in his work where sometimes the artifice is simply like a particular type of style, and sometimes, like it is in the Phoenician Scheme, the artifice adds to like this farcical, satirical nature of the film altogether. And it's almost as if Anderson is finally in on the joke. Now, Wes Anderson fans tell me he was maybe in on the joke the whole time, and I was maybe simply too aloof to see it. But I think it really worked here, and it goes to the self-referential thing that you were talking about, that I think that there's a self-awareness here in Wes Anderson's sense of humor, that he's clearly like winking at the audience, that he knows he's doing the Wes Anderson thing. So aside from artifice, the other token part of his sense of humor is specificity, and he reminds me almost of John Mulaney in that way. And we were talking about this before, that the simple idea of him doing these things and the simple idea of the characters that he builds is so funny that you can walk away from the theater laughing about it. Like the idea that Michael Cera is playing this administrative secretary, but he's also the world's foremost bug like knowledge person, like however you want to say that, like that he has incredibly knowledgeable about insects. The idea that Benicio del Toro's son, one of his sons, is a very skilled crossbow person. There's another one of his sons that likes to play the numbers and gamble. Like, there are all these like really funny running jokes, like especially the one with the hand grenades that we kept talking about, that I think the root of the humor is in such specificity and such oddity that's the root of why it's so funny. It's content that the oddity and the simple idea is the source of the humor. And that's something that, frankly, I didn't see in his prior work. Maybe it was there and I just didn't perceive it, but I've liked it so much more in these past two films. To add to that, I think Anderson is absolutely terrific at incorporating sets into his sense of humor. So obviously he's known for these very finely detailed, usually symmetrical set designs. The details of those sets and the specificity of the objects within those sets have more and more in his filmography become a part of the humor in a way.
Yeah.
This disqualifies, I think, the criticism that a lot of his aesthetic value is all on the surface, because I don't think it is. I think more and more he's incorporating it into his characterizations, and he's incorporating it more into his sense of humor. One of the ones that I really like is this very quick cutaway that I mentioned to you when they're with this like revolutionary socialist army, and he's Richard Ayoade is talking about how he is a socialist, but he has a few closet Christians with him. And there's a quick cutaway to this very, very densely orchestrated shrine that this person is praying to
on a helicopter.
On a helicopter, which is really funny. And I'm just thinking of like how much work it must have been for the set designer to build that little shrine for a 1 second laugh gag.
That happens a lot in this movie.
There's many, many, many more. That's just one. But in a way, it's this fusion of his set design and his sense of humor and his characterization that maybe felt a little too separate before, but he's certainly putting them together now.
Yeah, I can think of so many others. There is this painting that's on the wall in his gigantic mansion at the beginning of the film, and we see something happen with the communists later on with that painting.
Oh, they took the painting.
There's also these little moments where an arrow from one of his sons shows up multiple times. It's a great running joke.
One of my favorite jokes in the movie is when he just casually says that arsonists are going around the house and they're evaluating how much things cost in case he needs them to burn down the house for the insurance money. But he says it so deadpan, like this is just a thing people do.
So going from here, I would like to discuss spoilers in the film as well as its main themes and the ending. And I think that only could be talked about when it comes to spoilers. So if you have not seen The Phoenician Scheme, I recommend watching it and then coming back to this review unless you do not care to be spoiled. So as we approach the end of the film, we have this final showdown between Zaza and Benedict Cumberbatch's character, which I'm forgetting his name off the top of my head.
Yeah, but this is a very funny fight, by the way.
Yes, it's a very funny fight, but it's like this built-up frustration between two brothers that could only be displayed in this way by like brothers that have been grown up in very wealthy, rich households. And this is when we find out that the assassination attempts have been coming from his brother all along. It's the big reveal.
Oh, the big reveal wasn't that Bill Murray was God?
Well, I was actually just about to talk about that because throughout the film, during these assassination attempts, we didn't even talk about this, but there's these cutaways to him being in heaven and he is sort of undergoing judgment.
Yeah, and there's a religious undercurrent to this film that I think is interesting. Like a lot of the things that I like to talk about with the Bible, just to see how people feel about them when they're very religious, are things that this movie like puts a microscope on.
Yeah.
Like for instance, the role of slavery in the Bible, or what is worth eternal damnation and what isn't, despite what the Bible says. So I don't know. It's just a really interesting film when you're talking about theology and how it relates to the themes here.
Yeah, the film really becomes this meditation on wealth, I think, and its overall purpose. What does it rely on from other people, such as the slave labor that he is looking for? He starts a famine in another country just so that it would be cheap enough for him to build.
This movie has a much darker sense of humor than what his films typically have. I should say, like the fact that they use famine for a joke is funny.
Yeah. You know, all these things become increasingly important, I think, as the film progresses for this particular character. I think we slowly begin to see him detach from what he originally thought was important. And so that's pretty much the main crux of the film. In the end, after this whole battle goes down with Benedict Cumberbatch's character, we see that he has really changed his life. It's a really sharp cutaway to this restaurant. We see him choosing a life that's much more modest by running this little, is it like a French bistro or something? It's just like...
Yeah, and it's alluded to throughout the film that he's a really good cook and he's a really good dishwasher. So it tends to work out for this little bistro.
All this kind of comes full circle in a way that I wasn't expecting. I thought it was very endearing. I think it had a lesson to learn about life, like
Yeah.
knowing that you lived it in a very moral and just way, that you didn't like harm other people, that you were modest and you gave back to others.
It reminds me a lot of, and I know you've heard me say this like many, many times, but the end of Candide by Voltaire, where they've gone through all of these satirical elements and all of this like despair that they've seen in the world. And there's a question about like, what do we do now? And the answer is cultivate your garden. And I think cultivating his garden is essentially this little French bistro. It's where he's found his own internal happiness, where he can give back a little bit, but still like do something that modestly makes him happy.
Yeah. And we see that his daughter is there.
Yep.
And they're, after the night has ended and the shift has ended, he's paid her from the tin. Then they sit down and they start playing some cards. It's like really cute.
Yeah, I also love the idea that they've become so close and they were originally on a trial basis. And she says that she's getting engaged to Michael Cera's character on a trial basis.
Yeah.
I thought that was really sweet.
Yeah, it's really sweet. And another thing I want to add to this whole thing is earlier when I was talking about the supporting characters and how I did not like that they made the film feel fragmented away, and I wish I had seen more of them. There was something about this final scene that made me feel slightly different about this, because I feel like the supporting characters having less visibility in the film was showing how much they were as distractions to him evolving as a character, because we see all these people he's surrounded with are just as bad as he is. They're all looking for the same things that he originally was looking for: wealth and power and building all these things off the back of slave labor, and like how they're all complicit in the famine that's happening. I don't know if this was intentional, but for me, it seems like, oh yeah, we're not going to give the supporting characters much time and space because they're distractions to his evolution. Just as quickly as the film introduces these characters, it also discards them. And I saw that as a way to tell us where the real focus in our lives should be.
You could accuse Wes Anderson of being too into his style and not giving enough to the actors to do, because they're kind of like little parts of his diorama, so to speak. But I actually don't feel that way. I think that there are many actors that are really suited to his style, and they're able to show their acting chops in all of these subtle and interesting ways within this like farcical nature that he's going for. So you ready to go to grades?
I am ready to go to grades. I don't know what I'm going to say as a wrap up here. I feel like I said everything I need to say, but I give the movie a B. I really enjoyed it. I don't think it's one of my favorite Wes Anderson films. Asteroid City was definitely much higher up there.
How do you feel about Royal Tenenbaums? Is that like is that higher than this film?
Oh, yes.
Yeah. I really love that movie.
Yeah. But yeah, I have nothing else to add. I'm sorry. I enjoyed it.
okay.
I think
No,
I
I
just
know.
said everything in the review.
Yeah, totally. I have a couple more things to say. So I just want to say,
That's
like,
good.
I'm going to give the movie a B+. I thought it was really lovely. One thing I didn't mention is that Anderson's films move so quickly and they're so densely literate that it's easy to forgive them for being somewhat messy at times. But I think his characters spout this dialogue that's so verbose and so wordy and so literate that that's almost part of the joke more than what they're saying.
Yeah.
So I think you can forgive a lot of it for going so fast, or maybe for being a little messy because of how in on the joke it is. And again, his editing, especially between the dialogue is almost cutting the prior sentence off. It's cut so fast. So I think that really adds to the sense of humor. I will say, too, this is a bit of a negative, but even though the movie is 100 minutes long, I was getting a little sick of it towards the end. I think Anderson's style is so particular, and frankly, it moves so fast, and there's so much movie to consume here that it can feel a bit overwhelming towards the end of the film.
I agree with that. It's like, it's extremely dense.
I can only say this if I watched it again. I'm not sure there would be too much more for me to dig into. I think a lot of the density is part of the humor. At the same time, it is very, very funny in what it does. And we didn't mention the score, but I thought Alexander Despot's score was fantastic.
Oh, I love Alexander Despot.
Yeah,
he
usually works with Wes Anderson, but the film is like, it's billed as a caper, and you could confuse it with being a caper instead of a comedy from the score, because the score is really intense. It has this like very like drowny kind of cello vibe and these propulsive drums. I don't know. I really, really like the score here, and I thought it fit into the film really nicely, and it made it feel orchestrated in a way, almost talking again about like how the film feels like a ballet.
Yeah.
I thought the score worked really effectively here. And yeah, that's it. It was a lovely film.
All right, so that's it for our review of The Phoenician Scheme. The Phoenician Scheme is now in theaters, so if you haven't seen it, go check it out. Let us know in the comments, what did you think about this movie? As always, thank you guys for watching, and we'll see you next time.